Hello there, and thanks for joining me. We are looking at fractions today, and we'll be finding a common denominator. So to first of all review very quickly, the top bottom on a fraction is called a numerator, and the bottom number is called the denominator. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, finding a common denominator. In other words, turning these two fractions into fractions that have the same denominator. Once you can find fractions with the same denominator, it makes it easy to compare, to order, or to add or subtract. So we're going to be organizing our work on a 4-square organizer. And in the first quadrant here, what we're going to do is simply list the two fractions that we're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at 3/4 and 4/5. And as we walk through this step, we're going to first compare those two fractions. Okay, so just to recap, in the first quadrant of our 4-square, we're going to first list the fractions we're looking at. Next, we're going to find the LCM, that's the least common multiple of the two denominators. So I'm going to list my two denominators. In this case, it's 4 and 5 over here. And again, we're going to find the least, which is the lowest value, common, so they're both shared, and multiples, so we'll be counting by 4 and 5. So I've listed the first 5 multiples of my first denominator. Usually 5 is good enough, but if you find out that it's not enough multiples, you can always go back and list more. So what I would do is I would have a look here. I'm looking for a common multiple between 4 and 5. So counting by 5s, the next multiple will be 10, 15, not in that top line, 20. I'm going to stop there because 20 is a common multiple between 4 and 5. And that's the first one that we come to, so that's the least common multiple. So 20 would be our least common multiple. And I'm going to circle my least common multiple so that I know which one we're working with. Okay, so we've listed our two fractions, then we took the two denominators and made multiples lists to find the least common multiple, which we found in this case to be 20. So the next step is to convert both of our fractions into fractions with 20 as the denominator. So first thing I do is I just set up my quadrant. I relist my two fractions, and I set up my denominator that I know I want to turn each one into. Now, this fraction will stay the same size as long as you do the same thing to the numerator as you do to the denominator. So whether you multiply or you divide, as long as you're doing the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, same to the top and the bottom, you'll keep the same size fraction. So I'm going to ask myself, what would I do to go from 4 to 20? I know I'm getting bigger, 4 to 20. So I know that I'm multiplying rather than dividing. And I know that my fact family is 4 times 5 equals 20. So in this case, I need to multiply the denominator by 5. So that means I need to go back and multiply the numerator as well by 5. So I can fill that in now. 3 times 5 is 15. So that means 3/4 is the same size fraction as 15/20. I'm going to do the same thing to 4/5. I need to multiply by 4 in this case. So 5 times 4 is 20. So I'll do the same thing to the numerator. Do the same thing to the numerator as you did to the denominator. Oops, sorry, I made that mistake there. Sorry about that. So I'm going to fix that times 4. I want to do the same thing to the numerator as I do to the denominator. So 4 times 4, my new numerator there is 16. So 16/20 is the same as 4/5. Okay, so now since we have found the common denominator of 20 and we have converted both of our fractions into 20ths, now it's easy to, in this case, compare them. Because 3/4 is the same as 15/20, this 15 is less than 16. So that means that 3/4 is also less than 4/5. So I can compare them. Here I'm showing that you can also order them. So if you're ever asked to order from greatest to least, for example, you could then look 4/5 is equal to 16/20, which is the greater of the two. So if I wanted to order them from greatest to least, I could order them 4/5 and then 3/4. I could also, once I have a common denominator, I could also subtract them or add them. So if I wanted to know what 4/5 minus 3/4 was, once I have a common denominator, 16/20 minus 15/20, 16 minus 15 is 1. So 1/20 is my answer. Okay, so now let's practice. We are going to practice the four-square method of organizing to find a common denominator, and then I'd like you to compare the two fractions that I give you. So I'd like you to compare 3/8 and 1/3 by finding a common denominator. So go ahead and pause the video while you set up your four-square, find your least common multiple, convert to a common denominator, and then compare the two fractions. All right, so how did you do? Your LCM quadrant should look something like this, and you should have found the LCM to be 24. When you converted, you should have found that 3 times 3 is what you had to do, because 8, off alignment there, sorry about that. 8 times 3 is 24, so 3 times 3 would give you 9. And then down here you had to do times 8. So do the same thing to the top. 1 times 8 is 8, so 8/24. Because 9/24 is larger than 8/24, 3/8 is larger than 1/3, so 3/8 is greater than 1/3. Okay, so again, I'm going to give you some additional practice here. I'm going to give you the answers for comparing the two fractions by finding a common denominator. You can go and extend that to add or subtract the pairs of fractions or to order them as you wish, but go ahead and pause the video and each pair of fractions, see if you can find the common denominator using the method we just practiced. Okay, so how did you do? Here are the answers you should have found. 2/5 is greater than 3/10, and your common denominator here was 10ths. 5/4 is less than 8/6, and your common denominator here that you should have found was 12ths. And 4/9 is less than 5/6, and the common denominator you should have found there was 18ths. If you had any problems with any of those, the most likely places for mistakes would be that you counted by the wrong multiples. So go back and check your multiples portion of your four-square. Or you multiplied wrong when you converted the fractions. So go back and check your basic multiplication. All right, thank you very much for joining me.